Moving along, we're still in ideology, and we're looking here at American political attitudes. We're looking at some core beliefs that Americans share that unite us. However, the different ideologies, as you probably could guess, see it a little differently. So I'm gonna do my best trying to give some examples of how each side kind of see these different values and attitudes differently. All right, so American political attitudes 4.4, flip over. This is the overview card, and then we'll go to a more specific. All right, so what do we mean by these American attitudes? These are differing interpretation of core values. So the two ideologies have differing interpretation of core values that lead to conflict over the role of government in the lives of citizens. So understand that differing interpretation of these core values, there's 5 of them that we're going to look at, lead to a conflict over the role of government in the lives of citizens. All right, what are the 5 core ideas, core attitudes? Well, one is equality of opportunity. Both sides believe in it. Both sides will say they believe in it. They interpret it differently, not shockingly. All right. 2, free enterprise. That, again, marketplace, free marketplace. All right. Individualism. Different definition of like individualism or emphasis on individualism. Limited government. Both will talk about limited government, but there's much more of an emphasis on one side than the other, and on certain issues too. And then lastly, rule of law. Rule of law, that everyone is equal under the law, and therefore is above the law, is above them, that no one's above the law. All right, so we're going to look at those core principles. We're going to have 5 cards that go through that. I'm not going to do all 5 in this one lesson. We're going to go through equality of opportunity and free enterprise in this video, and then we'll have a second video that goes through individualism, limited government, and core rule of law. All right, so let's look at a core value, equality of opportunity 4.5. Equality of opportunity. On the back side, we're going to kind of have like liberal conservative viewpoints. Remember, think Democrat, Republican. Equality of opportunity. Pause if you need to. All right, so first off, let's define it. Equality of opportunity is the belief that each person should have the same opportunities to advance in society. It's the belief that each person should have the same opportunities to advance in society. All right, so on the liberal side, they believe that, historic injustices need to be fixed, and therefore government should help make opportunities and outcomes more equal. This is, remember, the key word here is making outcomes more equal. And an example of that is a program historically called affirmative action. And affirmative action is the idea that you try to give opportunities to historically disparaged groups. And this is an example, though, of maybe how it turns out and what's led to, in this case, a lawsuit. This is about a case you can see here accusing Harvard of discriminating against Asian American applicants. And then in the second paragraph, you'll see in a so-called statement of interest, the Department of Justice supported the claims of the plaintiffs, a group of Asian Americans rejected by Harvard. They contend that Harvard has systematically discriminated against them by artificially capping the number of qualified Asian Americans from attending the school to advance less qualified students of other races. It's fairly well known and shown through stats that Asians of all different groups, all groups really, score much higher on SAT scores than do other races. And so the Asians feel like there should be way more Asians at Harvard if they went based on test scores and GPA. And so Harvard was sued over this. So that's an example where affirmative action to try to help other groups might end up feeling like they hurt, in this case, Asian groups. So also another aspect of this isn't just the helping of groups that maybe are disadvantaged, but also more support for people who are poor. So there's going to be a lot more support on the liberal end for welfare and more generous welfare benefits. And then also the idea of free healthcare as well is a much more typical liberal position. On the conservative side, for example of that, sorry, let me get an example first. This is a headline, expanding this idea of more welfare and generous welfare. In California becomes the first state to allow undocumented young adults access to Medicaid. So even though they're not citizens and they did not enter the country legally in our immigration system, California allows young adults to access a Medicaid welfare program for healthcare. So that would be very controversial in a lot of states. But in California, which is a very liberal state, they became the first state in 2019 to allow people that are not citizens and are not here legally under our immigration system in order to access health benefits, state paid health benefits. All right, on the conservative side, the belief is that everyone has opportunities of education and entrepreneurship, like starting a business now, and therefore they need to make good choices and access it. Now, conservatives don't necessarily believe that people have equal opportunities of education in the sense that all schools are the same. Hence why conservatives also believe in school choice, that charter schools in a lot of cities, they support even especially minority students being able to choose private schools in some cases, because the school systems tend to be poor and not as good in public schools tend to not be as very good in cities. So they support like choice to go get the opportunities of education. And then less support on the conservative side for welfare. It doesn't mean they never support it, but just less support, much more work responsibility requirements in welfare would be a more conservative viewpoint, and then less support for free healthcare. Okay, less support for free healthcare. Maybe free healthcare for the very poor or people that are intellectually disabled or something like that, but not just like widespread free healthcare for everybody. And certainly a conservative wouldn't support free healthcare for an undocumented immigrant. At least generally they wouldn't. All right, so that's the idea. So opportunity is something where you have chance, an opportunity to succeed and become what you want in society. The liberals definitely think that there's much more of a government role in that, and conservatives believe like you need to teach people good decision making skills so they can take advantage of their own opportunity that they have right now. All right, free enterprise 4.6. Free enterprise 4.6. All right. In free enterprise is the right to compete freely in a market governed by supply and demand with limited government involvement. The right to compete freely in a market governed by supply and demand with limited government involvement. A perfect example is walk down the cereal aisle at your local grocery store and just look at the amount of cereal choices. Like, it's crazy. There's so many. I mean, there's probably literally dozens of different choices of cereal. This is free market, people freely buying what they want, and because people will buy a lot, people make more of it. And look at the soda aisle and the coffee creamer, and I mean, just the amount of different types of yogurt. I mean, just this is all an outcome of the free market and people making choices freely to buy what they choose and want. Look at the cell phone in marketplace. I mean, there's just so many different types of cell phones, and they're always trying to push new technology so that you'll buy a new one. And also, they're trying to compete against each other. This idea of competition, and that you have a right to compete in that with limited government involvement. Now, on the liberal side, you're probably not going to be surprised at this point that liberals are less trustful of the free market. They want more government regulation of business, and they believe that high corporate taxes is fair. High corporate taxes are fair. All right, so that's an issue on the liberal side. Let's look at some examples. This was in the 2019 debates, trying to win the nomination for 2020. And the Democrats first met out. There were 20 of them at a debate. It was pretty crazy. And they talked about who's responsible for economic strains in America. And this article said that leading Democrats said giant corporations. Elizabeth Warren said that was the reason for economic strains. Wall Street banks were mentioned, pharmaceutical companies, oil companies, billionaires. So the point of me showing this article is you can see, like, when the Democrats were in the debate, they used a lot of their kind of, their ideology, which was the problem in the marketplace is the big corporations, the big banks, the big Wall Street. They're the problem. They're the ones who, this kind of goes along with kind of the systematic. The problem is the system, and that kind of goes along with that as well. All right, on the conservative side, There's a belief that of less regulation, let people be free, and competition results in good things. Competition results in lots of choice of cereal and cell phones and cars, and let people choose what they want, and that might make someone a billionaire. I mean, that may happen because someone came up with an idea everybody wants, but that's just the way it happens. And then for conservatives, in order to let this competition happen so you have all kinds of products to choose from, therefore, lower corporate taxes is going to lead to more jobs and more competition, and that's a good thing. And so that's a better way to organize things, is to allow people to compete, companies to compete. All right. So that's kind of the really the overview here of. Oh, let me show you examples of conservatives. Sorry. Here's a classic conservative policy. Trump signs tax cut, first big legislative win. This is all the way back in 2017. The bill reduces the corporate tax rate to 21% from 35%. His supporters argue that it'll make U.S. businesses more competitive overseas. You know, other countries had lower corporate tax rates than us, so American business would sometimes relocate to these countries that had a lower tax rate. Many pass-through businesses also receive a 20% deduction. So anyway, the point is that this is a classic conservatism. Also looking at this last thing before we're done, perceptions of biggest threat by party identification. And look at the first one, big government. Who's scared the most? Biggest threat for the future. Is it big government? Big labor, which is labor unions. That was like maybe something back in the 50s or 60s that might score high, but not so much now. Labor unions have lost their power as less people join them. But big business or big government is what we're going to look at. And you can see big government, 81% of Republicans say it's the biggest threat, and independents say 67% say big government's the threat, whereas Democrats is only 51%. And then big business is the biggest threat to our future. Republicans, only 10% say big business. Just classic. See how this ideology falls out here, guys. 26% of independents say big business. So their independents kind of lean a little more Republican, right? Although they're right in the middle. And then 43% of Democrats say big business. So big difference between Democrats and Republicans on what's the biggest threat. But notice all of them have fear of big government. So that's that. When we get to limited government, that kind of plays a role. All right, cool. All right, that's that lesson. Thank you, guys. Study those. Important to make sure you do the sorts and understand them. Thanks.